This podcast is rated S for spoilers. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Half Past Podcast. This is episode 75, the movie review of Pacific Rim Uprising. We'll also discuss the Ready Player One trailer. I'm Graham Wicks, and here with me is my friend and co-pilot, Ian Jones.
That's right, your Jaeger co-pilot.
My Jaeger co-pilot. Do you think we would be drift compatible?
Yeah, we would, but I think even you would be unsettled by the amount of dirty crap in this mind. So you'd be like, damn it, Jones, blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, whatever, whatever.
That is very surprising, since I know so much about you already.
Right, yeah. We do not need to be in each other's minds.
No, maybe you would be shocked. That's the thing.
Right, yeah.
You're just like,
oh
my, what the heck, man?
Oh, I didn't know that was a fetish.
Oh. How you been, man? Since we haven't recorded in a couple weeks.
Well, good. Yeah, I've been doing good. I had a really successful presentation up in Phoenix.
Oh, awesome!
Demo with a client, so I was nice and relaxed to sit back and enjoy this film with some popcorn and a soda.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Me, I have actually been practicing guitar for like a few months now. So like I've been like getting better, just getting like a little bit better.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's been a few months, and so I've been looking at guitars, and you know what really bothers me, man? I've been starting to get advertisements like geared towards you for guitars.
Okay.
And I'm just like, you know, I have a huge problem. I know that this happens, that they track you, right?
Yes.
But I have a problem with them tracking me and me noticing them tracking me.
When you notice
because why would I be looking for guitars until recently? You know, it's like, and so all of a sudden there's just like I'm getting all these ads for guitars.
Okay.
Like I hate when that happens. The same thing happened when I bought a new wallet, like the other, like
nice.
a few weeks ago, and they're just like all these ads for wallets, and I'm like, dang it! I hate when I notice it. I absolutely hate it.
I'll tell you something that's even more frustrating than that, along the same lines.
Okay,
because those are recent ones.
Yes.
But when I get ads thrown at me, it's clickbait for movie-related things.
Yes.
And it's oddly specific to where almost no one other than me would actually click on it. And one of them had to do, because we were just talking about this.
Yeah.
On a podcast about Nicolas Cage. And so
yes.
One of the clickbait ones was, you know, why Nicolas Cage says that National Treasure 3 is being held up. And I feel like I'm one of the few people who would actually click on that because I wanted a National Treasure 3. I thought the first one was really average. I thought the second one was really brilliant. And I wanted to see them continue.
I love, you know, I've known you for a long time, and National Treasure is an old movie now. Like,
it is,
a long time ago. And so, the thing is I've always thought the first one was better than the second one. This is one of those time periods where we're just in disagreement on it.
Huh.
But, like, here's the deal. The thing that's so funny about that is you're right. I have no urge at all to see a National Treasure 3, and I can't think that most of the public does. So,
the thing is, if you look at it just from a monetary standpoint, between two movies, they made a total of $815 million off of
which is a lot of money,
and that's a lot of money.
Yes,
to be sitting there on, you know. So,
well, we know how Hollywood is. If they're going to make money, they'll do a sequel, which is which brings us back to around the Pacific Rim Uprising.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
The thing that's funny about Pacific Rim Uprising is Guillermo del Toro's known for like breaking even a lot, because his movies like make money but not a lot of money, and it's just because of his style of movies. But this one in particular you have Pacific Rim did really well in China. You remember that? This
Yes.
is one of those movies where it did really well in China. And then all of a sudden, the Pacific Rim Uprising, they hired a bunch of Chinese actors. Did you notice that they did that?
Yes. Yeah,
Isn't that awesome? I love seeing, like, I always love seeing capitalism at work.
Well,
Oh, it's fantastic.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I love reading subtitles in American movies. No, yeah. That's
You know what? I would do the exact same thing. The fact of the matter is China's a huge market for the entertainment industry.
You're right.
So, and it's the reason why they gear movies towards them pretty often. And this is not one of the only ones. There's a lot
that's
where they
why
do that.
Transformers did the same thing.
Yep, that's why Transformers did it too. So it's kind of funny how that works out.
And this time, I would even argue they get a better showing. I remember reading... just before the first Pacific Rim came out, I read an article, and I think it was on... Oh boy. It was either on Comic Book Vine or ComingSoon.net, which are both two really, really big ones that get advertisers in. And it was basically talking about how the first Pacific Rim was going to have this team, these triplets from China... who were supposed to be badass. And really the article, I think, was more geared towards that region.
Yeah.
You know, it just showed that they were going to put marketing there. And then when you see them in the movie, they get taken out right away. So
immediately. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. That's one of the things that bothered me about the original, because you had these three guys, and like they're like, oh, they have the three style or whatever the heck they were saying, the triplets is what they had them in there, and so they had the 3-hand style because it was a really weird robot that had 3 hands and had 3 arms. And you're like, oh, what's this thing got to do? And it just like they get taken out immediately. It's really unfortunate. It's pretty bad.
All right.
All right. Now that we've gone on a huge tangent for like 5 minutes, let's just go. Let's finally get into Ready Player One. So, I just watched this trailer. The movie's already out, so we're gonna do it next week. But the only thing, I don't have a lot of things to say, but I have some questions. So I think it looks fun, right? And Spielberg is directing this one. And the reason why I have a question is, why don't you think that Robert Zemeckis isn't directing this one? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I just, it probably was just that he was looking to do a movie and was always really intrigued by the book.
Maybe.
And, Steven Spielberg has not been greedy when it comes to these opportunities. He's hired Robert Zemeckis. He does hired,
all the time.
He hired Michael Bay to do Transformers. I mean, those were some big budget movies that he could have worked on.
Which he usually does it. That's why I was wondering why this one in particular why isn't it Robert Zemeckis doing it? It's kind of funny. It's just him and Robert Zemeckis have been linked up for decades, so it's just one of those things where I'm like, this seems like this would be a movie that Robert Zemeckis would direct and not Spielberg, because Spielberg lately has been doing more of the drama, more Academy Award style movies for the past,
Well, I mean,
times he's been directing.
And I would argue that there may have been. They're already thinking about trying to give this an Oscar push for animated film next year. It technically qualifies.
Really?
Because more than 70% of it is animation. There are some strict rules that you have to follow to get that one in there, and that could be what they were thinking. But I also think the budget behind it probably needed his name.
I bet that works.
So I think that there's a couple of reasons why it's him and not maybe someone else that he's backing.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I mean that could be a reason why Spielberg's doing it instead of Zemeckis, because it looks like there's a lot of motion capture in this movie. Also, with that said, Spielberg has done that like numerous times before, right? Like he's done a lot of movies where that's in it. And so maybe that's why they've done that. And I guess the only other thing I have to say about the movie is that going along the lines of that is there's like a lot of CG in it. So I'm always cautious when that happens because a lot of movies that have a lot of CG in it, they tend to have problems, but it's Spielberg, so I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's perfectly fine, but it's just one of those things. Do you have anything else to say?
You know, I remember when we watched Tintin and how some of the camera work was in that film. I remember thinking, you know, you could never film a real movie that way. Some of the stuff that they were doing with the camera.
Which is one of the advantages.
And I remember saying to whoever that I was with, you know, this guy, you know, Spielberg needs to do more movies because I was just blown away by a lot of the camera work that was there. So, you know, from looking at the trailers, although it looks cool, it also looks incredibly corny. So I'm hoping that isn't the case when we actually watch it.
That's what I hope also. We'll have to see what happens, and I hope that we do get some more of those camera angles and everything. I love seeing just like the creativity of camera work in movies. I've always loved that. So it'll be fun to see if that happens in this one, and it probably will. I mean, some of the scenes in the trailer looks like, oh, well, that's a pretty cool scene, you know. So we'll have to see what happens. You got anything else?
No, that's it for me.
All right, let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll get into this Pacific Rim sequel. Jake Pentecost, son of Stacker Pentecost, reunites with Mako Mori to lead a new generation of Jaeger pilots, including rival Labrynth and 15-year-old hacker Amara against the new kaiju threat. You know, there's a lot of words in there that aren't really a part of the normal English language.
That was a rough read. I would say you're worse than some time, but I wouldn't want to freaking read it. So that's not a normal sentence.
There's just a lot of stuff in there where it's just like, what? There's no common stuff in there. That's hilarious. I'm not reading it again. This movie is directed by Stephen S. DeKnight. This is his directorial debut. So he hasn't done anything else except for he's a producer for Spartacus, like all the Spartacus shows from Stars. That's like all he's done. And so this is like his first movie, which is a pretty big movie for like, you know, the first try, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. That really surprises me, actually.
I know, right? The studio took a risk. I don't know. That's kind of weird. John Boyega is Jake Pentecost. He was in Attack the Block, Star Wars, and Detroit. Scott Eastwood as Nate Lambert. Now, Scott Eastwood. So I did this outline, right? Uh-huh. And I type in Scott Eastwood. And I'm like, you know what? That's funny. That's another Eastwood. And I didn't really think much about it. And then the minute I saw him on screen, I was like, he looks a lot like Clint Eastwood. That has to be his son, right?
It is.
Like it's just
his
like
much less talented son.
Jeez. You know, that may be true, but that's usually something you don't say out loud.
No. You know, there's 4 robots at the end of this movie. 5 if you count Scott Eastwood.
Okay.
He's awful.
You're terrible.
It's like they gave John Boyega a cardboard cutout for a co-star. Said, here you go. Let's see how good you really are, John. Here's your good-looking cardboard cutout of Scott Eastwood.
Dang it, Jones! I can't. Man, so much hate for Scott Eastwood.
Yeah,
It's fine.
He's
it's
not
fine.
good. He was in one of those fast... What was the last one?
He was in
Furious?
Fate of the Furious. The thing is I didn't recognize him until this movie, which says a lot. He's also in Suicide Squad, which I don't remember that either. That's so weird. But he's also been in Flags of Our Fathers and Gran Torino, which also explains it because his father directed those movies.
Right, yeah.
So it's just like, geez, man. I remember, it's so funny because, like, after the movie, I went with Jackie, and I was like, man, that guy looks a lot like Clint Eastwood. There's no way that's not his son. And so I was just like, look up young Clint Eastwood. And then she looked up young Clint Eastwood, and he looks exactly like his father back when he was that age.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, oh, that has to be his son. And so then we looked up his son, and yes, that's him. And it was just like, what the hell? And it's so funny, because I've seen him in other movies. Didn't notice him at all. He's more front and center in this movie than he is in any other.
Didn't notice him at all. I think is a really good way of...
Oh,
hey, who's
man.
that good-looking guy standing in the background? Yeah, just don't give him any lines, though.
Man, you are harsh. Okay, so, Cailee Spaeny as Amara Namani. This is her first major release. She hasn't really done anything else because she's young, so she hasn't had a chance to. Gorman as Dr. Herman Gottlieb. He was in Layer Cake, The Dark Knight Rises, and Crimson Peak. Charlie Day as Dr. Newton Geisler. He was obviously most known for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, if anybody watches that. Horrible Bosses, and The Lego Movie. Tian Jing as Leeuwen Xiao. She was in The Great Wall, that really weird movie with Matt Damon in it. You remember that movie?
Yeah, Matt Damon with the ponytail.
I can't help but think, like, Matt Damon in that movie feels like one of his awesome cameo appearances that he always has, you know? Matt Damon's been known to have, like, the best cameos. He had the best one in Thor Ragnarok, where he's playing as Loki. And then he also has that awesome one from, God, what is it? Is it Eurotrip?
He does have an awesome cameo in Eurotrip.
And Scotty doesn't know. And it's just like, what the heck?
Such a good, terrible movie that is.
Right? Yes, it is. And so I remember watching the trailers for Great Wall, and that's what it looks like. It looks like he just should not be in that movie. It doesn't even look like he's got this ponytail that's never existed in his career. So it's just like really weird. She was also in Kong Skull Island and The Glory of the Tang Dynasty.
Okay, so that's where we've seen her, Kong Skull Island.
Yes, Kong Skull Island is where we've seen her from. Jin Zhang as Marshall Quan. He was in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, My Lucky Star, and he was also in Ip Man 3. Adria Arjona as Jules Reyes. She was in Person of Interest in Emerald City, so she's mainly done TV work. She hasn't really done any. This is like her first role in like a film. The last one we have here, I'm just going to completely ignore all the cadets. So, Rinko Kikuchi as Mako Mori. She was in Babel, Norwegian Wood, and Kumiko, the Treasure Hunter. And that's the last star I have, because I'm ignoring the cadets.
Good.
So, anything else?
Nope.
Anything else you got for these characters before we go on a quick break?
Yes.
All right, let's go on a quick break then. Alright, Joes, we're back with the Quirks and Likes section, and I'm going to do what I do every once in a while and surprise you and let you go first.
Alright, you might be sorry that you did.
Oh, nice.
Okay, well, we already got one of those quirks out of the way, which is good, because I caught you off guard with it.
You did.
That was my comment about Scott Eastwood.
Oh, man.
Alright, so despite a lot of callbacks to the original movie, there's a disconnect between this movie and the sequel.
Oh, yeah.
And that's because there's a different filmmaker, there's a different story process.
And a different cast for the most part.
And a different cast for the most part. But really, you know, the first one to me despite the fact that there are giant robots fighting interdimension like monsters from another dimension.
Yeah.
You know, the first movie felt grounded. It had a weight to it in both the storytelling and I think a lot of the visual elements, the effects and everything. And the sequel feels like a video game adaptation that like comes out years later and is just so much fun to play, but wouldn't make a great movie. You know, like the sweat, the grease, the feeling of desperation, it's completely gone. And, you know, like one of the things that I thought about was that they had that clock in the first movie, which is not present at all in this one.
No. Yeah, it's one of those things that when Guillermo del Toro did it, it was a way it helps ground it by having this clock, and there's a sense of time that has to happen, because like this is, you know, this thing's gonna open right now, like when this timer goes, it's gonna open, the breach is gonna open, and everything's gonna go to shit, so we have to get through with it before then. And so there's a sense of panic, and that's where a lot of the weight comes from the movie. You're right.
You know, and it's just not there. And, you know, I mean, the effects, I think, are great. You know,
I think the effects were pretty good.
Yeah, visually, I think the movie's strong, but there's just something missing. And, you know, we've got robots in this one that are just flying through the air and kicking. And, you know, it's like some other version of this. Like, what's that anime with the robots?
Evangelion?
No.
Evangelion?
Starts with a G.
Oh, Gundam?
Gundam. Yeah. It kind of felt more like that.
Yes. I could see that.
You know, and my girlfriend described it as, you know, when the trailers came out, she's like, boy, this looks like a version of the Power Rangers. And, you know, that gets me to my second quirk, because it kind of turns into that with these teenagers with attitude at the end of the movie.
It's funny that she says that, because it does kind of get there. Teenagers with attitude.
Teenagers with attitude.
Which is what's so funny about that dang scene that kind of bothered me in this movie is when whatchamacallit dies. I can't even remember, but when the cadet dies, there's a scene where they decide to go for this kaiju, the Megakaiju. And so they go for it, and they run after it, and John Boyega, you know, Jake's just like, don't stand down, and they're like, no, we got this, and he's just like, freaking teenagers. And then one of them proceeds to get killed that process, and then it's just like, that whole sequence is just such a weird thing to me, because somebody just dies, and there's not much of a, like,
I know. Yeah,
even the guy
the
next to
teenagers
him,
comment, I mean, that didn't escape me either.
Right?
But,
and the guy dies next to him, and his reaction really wasn't, like, there's all this build-up about family, and they're supposed to be fighting together, finally, you know, because that's a part of the storyline of this movie. Yet, there's really not much of a, like, there's not much of a care that this guy just died. And it just was so weird to me when I was watching this. All right, keep going. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Well, so speaking of family, I love the idea that, okay, this, Pentecost had a son, even though he never talks about him.
No.
In the first movie. I feel like this is an accessible way to reintroduce, this universe, especially here in North America where the film didn't do so well.
Yes.
But I had an issue with the film starting off the way that it did, because while I think it's great that they chose John to be the face of this moving forward, like he's the face of the franchise, I thought the film should have been more of him and Mako, and showing that they are brother and sister, like this crappy photoshopped picture that he has, which is badly photoshopped, of them growing up together, is like that doesn't cut it for me. That's not enough, and it's almost like they had these cameos from the first movie to like to like drive home that this was a sequel. You know, when one of the heroes only, you know, like Charlie Hunnam isn't even in this movie, and I think his character is mentioned once, and so while I think this is a good choice going with John, I just felt like, you know, the intro should have been a younger version of him, you know, with Mako training, or, you know, like it should have shown him getting into trouble instead of just partying.
Yeah, instead of, you're talking about moving back before where he's training with her and then actually having that connection with each other and then going forward, as opposed to him just basically being a troublemaker.
Right.
Like, he just never really, he like basically was one of the best people at the school, and then as a cadet, and he just like decided not to deal with it. So what ends up happening is he just has this kind of a chip on his shoulder pretty much through a good portion of the movie, until it changes instantly when his sister gets killed.
Right.
Like, it's just like instantaneous when that happens, which is one of my quirks.
And so the importance of that scene, I think, is lost because one, they don't have that much screen time together.
No, they don't.
Which
is the bigger problem, because you don't get a connection that they were like raised together as brother and sister. It's just mentioned that they're brother and sister. They don't feel that way at all when you watch the movie, because they don't have a lot of screen time together. Okay.
You know, I love the twist with Charlie Day. I felt like they blew it, though. You know, he makes a reference to Alice early on in the movie, and even though it was sort of a throwaway line, there was something about it. There was something about the way he said it that I was just kind of like, how odd that he mentions having who you think is a girl at home, but he doesn't really seem like the kind of guy who would.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that. So for me, it was a giveaway because in the first movie, though they are competing scientists, right?
Yes.
Like they're trying to figure out, they're both trying to figure out how to solve this problem, and they're doing it their own ways, and they come together in the end and realize that they need both of them to solve this problem. And so they essentially are like, they reconcile, and they're like friends by the end of that movie. So the giveaway for me that Charlie Day was bad is when Gorman looks at him and he goes, "Look, man, I'm still having nightmares." And it's like a very serious thing to say. And then Charlie Day is just like, "Yeah, huh." And then just kind of like walks away. And to me, that was the connection where I'm like, okay, he's acting strangely anyway throughout this entire movie. He's already a strange character from the first movie, but he's acting even more strangely in this one. So you already knew something was wrong with him. And then you have that scene where your friend tells you outright, very seriously, that you're having like some real issues with the nightmare. And his reaction was just not how it should be. And so I instantly thought there's something wrong with this character, and that he's got to be a bad guy somehow. And that's what caught me. That's what I gave it away for me.
Nice. Well, that was, I mean, that's a really good, and I didn't really pick up on it there.
But I mean, the thing is it's the exact same sequence that you're talking about.
Yes.
It's the same conversation.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's the same scene that gives it away. So you're right.
And I kind of wish that they would have held on to it just a little bit more before he goes home to Alice. You know, so because at that point, it's got to be him somehow. You know, they're trying to set up the Shao Industries as somehow being behind it all, and that's, you're just blatantly giving it away that's not really the case.
Which is unfortunate, because they have a really good setup with Leeuwen Shao anyway, because she's so, like, like, she's got this ruthless attitude about her. Like, she's this ruthless CEO type.
Yeah.
So you're thinking they're going to go that direction anyway. But it ends up being this switch. So they had the setup to where they made you think it was something else. But it really is Charlie Day's character. So it's really Newton.
Yeah.
So they had the setup. They just didn't quite get it right. And that's, so I get what you mean.
Okay, so the last thing is, like, in this movie, the neural handshake, the way it's portrayed in the first movie is quite different from how they do it in this movie.
Yes.
And, only 10 years has gone by, so I kind of wonder how, it went from being you had to be siblings, pretty much, or soulmates, to be drift compatible, to where they're just training everyone to be interchangeable parts. And
it's kind of funny that you say that. Because that's one of the things that was in the first movie, where it definitely seemed like you're either soulmates or related in some way. Because there was a brother, there was a son and a father.
Uh-huh.
There was Charlie Hunnam and his brother. Then there was Charlie Hunnam and Mako. And, and then it was the triplets. So it's funny, I really didn't even think about it that way, so I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and, Pentecost was really the one exception, because he was
the exception.
He was able to pilot alone, and so he could drift with anyone.
Yes. Yep.
That's it for me as far as quirks. That's a lot.
That's a lot, and I got some of mine in there in the process, so that was a good conversation. I really don't have much more to say, because a lot of my problems with the movie was pacing and story, like the other problems I had, but we already talked that through. But in terms of, like, pacing for me, is the beginning is really slow, and it has this real slow thing, and then it picks up really quickly towards the other half of the movie, and it just, I really wish there was just that feeling from the end of, the last half of the movie. It would have been nice to have that in the beginning of the movie also, which brings you to the same thing you were talking about the weight. There wasn't a lot of weight, because it was the first part of the movie just didn't have any, they were just kind of going along with whatever business needs to happen, and you have John Boyega just meeting up with this other character, which is the only point of that scene, is to introduce the two main characters. And then you go forward, and he's spending most of his time going out the door. He's trying to leave. He's like, I gotta go, then Mako dies, and then after Mako dies, that's when he switches. And then the movie kind of switches right there, too, where the wait happens. So it's just, there's not really good pacing throughout this whole movie, so it doesn't stay consistent, and that's what bothered me a lot throughout this movie. The only other issue I have with this movie, and that has to do with freaking John Boyega's cardboard co-star. And that's, they clearly don't like each other, so when they first meet back up with each other at the school, they clearly don't like each other, and they kind of make an agreement that where he's just like, well, you do your thing, and then I'll just say what he said, and then and then I can get out of here. So, there's never really an explanation of why the hell, they didn't even explain it as if they were rivals. It's just assumed that they were rivals. You know what I mean? Right. They didn't really explain why they didn't like each other. I just didn't understand the whole time. And then even when they were piloting with each other, it didn't seem like there was that much of a conflict there either. You got one at the very beginning where they're standing there, and the handshake isn't clean. It's not a full thing. It's at 60% and holding or something like that. And they kind of talk it out with each other the whole time, but there's never really anything that explains why these guys just don't like each other. And the thing that's so weird about that is there's an obvious time period where you could make that connection without changing much of the movie. As soon as they do the neural handshake, all you needed was the conflict there. You just need to show seeds of them having this issues, but all you saw was kind of John Boyega, because it was only his view. So you only saw John Boyega practicing and training, And that was it. But, like, that was an easy time period where you could just be like, explain why they hate each other. Like, I don't understand why their conflict is there. And then they have to deal with it just so that they can hold, sort of. So, and that's without me even changing the movie that much. Like, you just change the scenes, and then that gets explained. And so it just bothered me. It just really bothered me that I'm like, why? They didn't explain anything about why they just didn't like it.
It seems like maybe that ended up on the cutting room floor along
with
a very weird little potential love triangle, which I don't understand. That kind of creeps in there. And so
Right?
oddly enough, so this is one of those things that usually drives me nuts. And I left the theater and it drove me nuts. But as I started thinking about it, I was like, I kind of like that they don't go too much into it.
I love that they didn't go too much into it.
Because, A, we hate love triangles.
Yes. Yeah.
So overused.
Yeah, it is.
But I love that they both get a kiss on the cheek from the same woman.
One of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Nice.
That's one of my likes.
Right.
I thoroughly enjoy. There's a lot of goofiness in this movie, which a lot of people might hate, but I enjoyed. I enjoyed a lot of the goofiness in this movie. And so that scene in particular, I just love because she's just like, be careful. She kisses Scott Eastwood, and then she kisses John Boyega. And I love the scene where it's like she walks away and they both are just like, and then John Boyega's just like, that's just confusing. And then it's never brought up ever again through the rest of the movie. And I just love that happens. That's just confusing. There's just a lot of scenes like that in this movie that I love. I get that some people might not like it, but I enjoy the goofiness. Just like even when he's just like eating the ice cream.
Which...
And it's just like such a stupid thing.
He was putting on. It was just like really,
right?
He doesn't have any chocolate syrup. He's putting on whipped cream, and then he's got an array of different kinds of sprinkles.
Yep, just so many sprinkles, and he's just like sitting there, and he's just like eating and I love how he's just like doing the whipped cream. Like, you get this attitude, like, you feel like Scott Eastwood in that scene. You're just like, really? Come on, let's go out. And I just love that transition. Oh, did you have any other quirks? Because that was mine.
Oh, no, I don't.
Alright, so we'll just keep going with the likes then. So I definitely enjoyed some of the goofiness, so I enjoyed all of that. I also enjoyed the fact that even though this is part of the problem with the movie because it's so different from the first one, like it doesn't feel like it's from the same franchise, but I enjoyed the different style of Jaegers. I liked the fact that we saw one that was like faster, like I enjoyed seeing that, and it was just faster and sleeker, and the fighting style fit that, and that's something you didn't get from the first one because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it's still a giant freaking robot, but I thought it was cool. I enjoyed the different fighting styles, like I was saying, and I thought I was gonna hate the form of Megakaiju, but I instantly loved it, and I don't know why. I thought when I saw what was happening in front of me, I'm like, okay, what the heck are these little things that are coming? Okay, they split off and they move. I'm like, okay, so they're going to that. I thought at first that they were going to heal it, and then that was going to be an issue. But instead, it just formed into this freaking Megakaiju, which also has to do with Power Rangers. And it's just, I'm like, oh my god, they did a Megakaiju. And I thought I would hate it, but I ended up loving it. Like, it just was like so much more powerful, and they had to resort to really this weird plan of let's just blow up in the air and then just use the weight as essentially a major, a mega punch. And that was it.
Which, and I remember thinking, are they really freaking doing this?
Right!
And the thing that I loved about it is, and they didn't have the balls to do it, but what if that didn't work? You know,
right?
What if it didn't stop that big thing?
Oh, man. They would have been in trouble. There's nothing they could have done. All the other ones were destroyed, like, instantly. As soon as it turned into the Megakaiju, it didn't matter. It was just like ripping them apart. It didn't even matter anymore. The only other thing that I have that I really enjoyed was I really enjoyed the Leeuwen Xiao character, where I like that she's like this shrewd businesswoman and she's worked her whole life for this, and she's trying to get this taken care of. And then Newton just kind of ruins everything. And I like that she just seemed like so shrewd and terrible, yet she has a redeeming quality at the end where she helps them take this thing out and save their lives at the same time. So I just enjoyed her character for some weird reason. I really liked her. And that's all I have.
All right. I mean, we talked about the humor, right? I think that was really important.
Yes.
I felt like the trailers didn't really do the film justice. I think it's probably better than what, the trailers made it look like. 'Cause
I would agree.
Because there are some really serious things that happen over the course of the movie that, make you want to root for everyone. I kind of wish they could have developed John's character more, and the young girl some too, because it seems like that's a good partnership. Moving on to the next one, I really liked the little scrapper guy at the beginning.
That was a fun sequence and a fun character.
And
it almost felt like that Scrapper was like a character on its own, because just the way it moved, and it was like really kind of childlike and everything. Yeah. It was just like different. It was just so different from everything.
So different else from the other one. So I thought that was really cool, and I thought it was cool that Scrapper played a part at the end of the movie, even though he's the smallest one.
Yep.
So I mean, those were really the things that I liked. I can't really say that there was any part of this that I loved, other than, it is fun watching robots and monsters fight. That's
obviously
that's just always going to be a winning combo for me.
Yep. Me too. That was the whole reason why I watched the first one. It was Guillermo del Toro and then robots fighting monsters. I don't need anything else. But
you said something that I remember from the first Pacific Rim. And
yes.
And I think that, and in what you said, I think separates this one from that one. And that was the way that the first movie started. You got a fight between a Category 2 and Gypsy Danger. And in that, the main character loses his brother, but they manage to defeat the kaiju, and he gets it as far as it can go before finally passing out. And so I thought that was such an epic beginning, and this movie doesn't have that.
It does not. And the thing is that scene in Pacific Rim, the first movie, I have always said that about Pacific Rim, that I went to that movie to see giant robots fighting monsters. It happens in the first 10 minutes before the title even pops up.
You're right.
And so, I had already received what I needed, 10 minutes in. And it was an awesome scene, and it carries throughout the rest of the movie, because you have that, and then you introduce what happens to this character years later, and then you realize that he gets pulled back in. And to me, that, from a storytelling perspective, that's just a better way to do it. And I think that helps with the story, it helps with pacing, it helps with everything. So it just makes this one choppier.
Can you pick me up with some other likes, buddy? Or have we already
I think we've gotten all the likes, man. It's one of those movies where it doesn't have... We also just sum up and rate this thing. So here's the deal. This movie, for me, has some things that I like about it. Like I said, I enjoyed the different Jaegers. I thought the visuals were great, even though it looks completely different from the first movie because it's a totally different filmmaking crew. And then you have, I think it's fun. I love the goofiness. Just the humor in it was just so, like, I enjoyed the part where she kisses both of them and they're just like, that's just confusing. And then I love him eating the ice cream. And there's a lot of just scenes like that with John Boyega. And I feel like John Boyega, this is one of the time periods where I feel like he did a decent job carrying a movie, even though it's a rough thing to do when you have a co-star like Scott Eastwood. I feel like that's going to be a run-on thing for future podcasts. Anyway, I just thought that, to me, the movie I thought was just fun. And the thing that I think that this movie does that makes it okay is that I think this movie knows what it is, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, and so you just accept it. It's giant robots fighting monsters, and you're like your inner 10-year-old is just like awesome. You know, it's just an awesome thing to watch and have fun with. And so one of the things that I also mentioned before I went to go see this movie, and here's another issue with the trailer that we're talking about, and that's because it looks like Transformers. Like, because it's not a different visual style like the previous one was, it really has a feeling of Transformers. The problem with Transformers is terrible. So the thing about this movie, and I remember before I watched this movie, I was with Jackie, and she was talking, and we were talking about how this movie looked like Transformers. And I said, well, the difference is I'm pretty sure that this movie has higher ratings than the past 2 Transformers movies combined. And she was just like, no way. And so she looked it up, and it is. Because they're that bad. Like, they're just not good. Because it's like they're taking themselves too seriously when it really should just be Transformers fighting things. Right. Like, I don't understand. Like, how do you mess that up? Like, I don't understand how you mess up Transformers. You just all you have to do is make a coherent story. But none of them have, like, a coherent story except for the first one. So you have, like, all these real issues. This one has somewhat of a coherent story, even though the only reason why it's weird is simply because it has the first one and it's so different. So a lot of the things from the first one kind of gets broken a little bit in the second one. So some of the rules are just not quite the same. And so you can tell there's just this weird connection and that they didn't mean to have this sequel and they just did it anyway. So you kind of have that feeling throughout this movie. Even the explanation of why the first ones, they're just like, well, maybe they're not attacking cities randomly. Maybe they're going to one location. And I'm like, that's just a weird connection to make with the first movie. But with all that said, in this long rant that I've been talking, I'm just going to say rent it. And then that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Netflix movie. I mean, it's obviously much bigger than that, but this just isn't. Yeah. This is something where, you know, my girlfriend and I, you know, that we're going to watch this on Netflix, I'm sure, so I won't even bother buying it. That way she can get her Charlie Day fix, which I don't understand, because I'm superior to him in every way. Little 5-foot Charlie Day. Such a huge fan of. The guy is the Rat King. Well, but not really the Rat King. Because you and I refer to someone else as the Rat King. But that's what they refer to him as on It's Always Sunny.
Yes, they do. They always refer to it It's Always Sunny. But the Rat King is definitely that guy from Suits.
It is. It is.
The competitor.
If we ever do
the rival lawyer,
Nutcracker, he's gonna be our Rat King,
right? The rival lawyer of Harvey in Suits. That's the Rat King. Oh man! All right, Jones. Let's wrap this up then.
Wonderful.
So, Netflix and Reddit.
Netflix it.
All right. If anybody wants to contact us, we have our home on the web at halfpasspodcast.com.
Like us on Facebook.
We're on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify, so go ahead and give us a rating. 5 stars is always good.
5 stars. We're on Stitcher, Libsyn, and TuneIn.
And you can always email us at halfpastcast@gmail.com. That's halfpastcast@gmail.com.
We're on Twitter. Tweet us at halfpastpodcast.
And I'd just like to thank everybody, and I always thank everybody for their patience, because we're not consistent at all, but we definitely get them out.
Yes, we're starting to get them out here.
Hopefully this summer we'll run right through, and we'll get them consistently. We'll see what happens. But that's it. So next week we have Ready Player One. I think that'll be a fun watch. I'm ready to see it. I'm actually kind of excited about Ready Player One. How about you?
I am, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I haven't seen a Spielberg movie in a while, actually. I can't think of the last one I've seen, because I haven't really been watching his more drama ones like Bridge of Spies. So I can't even remember the last time I've seen a Spielberg movie, so it'll be fun. Lots of fun. Anything else, Jones?
No, that's it. I just pretend I said something clever.
This is the Half Past Podcast. I'm Graham Ricks.
Jonesy.
See you next flick.
Oh.
Oh, man.